Hello folks, so happy to be with you once again to break down the last 8 books that I read in November, bringing the total of the month to 16 books. We had a pretty good go-round this month, and I'm excited to get more in-depth with all the books that I read. So let us start with the nonfiction, and we'll move to the fiction afterwards, starting with least enjoyed to most loved. We have to begin with the creative mindset, and what may be the death knell for my reading self-help, self-improvement type books. I feel that maybe I have reached my sufficiency. I have helped myself enough. I am probably done with this genre because when I read a title like The Creative Mindset, what I'm assuming we are going to discuss and hopefully learn about is the creative process of artists. But what I was given was a rote manual for innovation disguised as creativity. This is kind of a bait and switch, unfortunately. This was not what I was expecting at all. I was expecting more of an artistic look at the creative process. Like I said, this is more geared towards product innovation, towards creating new goods and services, which I think has its place in this society in which we live, but was definitely not what I was looking for, even in the slightest. We go through, there's an interesting acronym using the words creative, and it went in one ear and out the other because I don't remember the acronym even at all. But the basic premise is an idea of creating an environment and a mindset to offer goods and services in a new way, which at its core, I think is a totally fine thing. But it has become very difficult for me to divorce the private equity mindset from creativity. As someone who worked briefly in the film business and who has been a part of creative endeavors in the past, it just becomes incredibly difficult to read a perspective of creativity from the money side of things instead of from the artist side of things. It just doesn't click for me personally. I understand that commerce is incredibly important, and the marriage of art and commerce is incredibly important, especially in the film business where I worked, and also in the publishing business and anything that you can imagine that we describe as art. There is also inevitably a commerce or commercial side of that. And I think that the job of the artist is to perform in that playground, is to work in that structure in a way where they do not sacrifice their soul to the commerce more so than they have to, or in a more positive way that they cling to the art in a way that gives them the ability to sleep at night without feeling that they have, completely turned their back on the art and the message and, just the self-expression that they're trying to get through with their art. So I didn't get anything out of this book, but it did trigger in me a bit of a discussion or a bit of a thought rabbit hole that I went down between the relationships between creativity and business, between the relationships between art and commerce. These are all things in the utopian society in which we live in our teens and early 20s, at least for me personally, where you think that you can buck the trend and get out of the system and just art for art's sake, and all that is perfectly good, and it is a perfectly interesting and worthwhile pursuit. But at a certain point, maybe I'm cynical, but the structure becomes too heavy. The economic systems become too robust to kind of work around. And I give props to the people who are doing their art and doing their passion outside of the structure and the system, and hopefully they are able to eat and buy food. But you have a kid and things like that kind of go out of the window. But there is a way, I think, to perform in that system without completely selling out, for lack of a better word. But I'm done. I'm done with self-help books. I just can't do it anymore. I have read a ton of them, and at one point in my life when I was on the come up and feeling a bit more lost and unmoored about my future and who I was as a person, I found a little bit of value in them. But I think maybe I'm just past that, and what's more interesting is I'm finding more value in terms of humanity and growth and being a better person in reading fiction these days. So I hope to, move away from self-help. I'm making this video to remind myself when I see a title that seems interesting on Kindle Unlimited to be like, no, son, you have decided against the self-help oeuvre. So moving on to the next book. And that would be another bit of a disappointment. Sapiens. I have a question for the historical anthropologists. Why do you have to write in a tone that feels like we're on a 2014 r/atheism forum? The tone is so glib and snarky with all of these books, not just with this one, the David Wengrow book that I read earlier this year, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit more than this one, but it still had that same I'm smarter than you tone, which really is incredibly off-putting from the jump. So already, outside of content, I was just on the back foot with this author. I just was like, why are you lecturing me and talking down to me, man? I'm just trying to learn a little bit. But everything feels so, every word drips with this like condescension of like, oh, well, of course, I know this, but you, plebeian, you don't understand these concepts. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm reading the book. I want to understand them more. Can you not make fun of me while we're doing it? From the jump, I felt alienated by this author. And although I enjoyed the first couple of chapters, the more ancient of histories of humanity, as we got more modern and the author started making more claims about different technologies and their relationship to the growth and development of humankind, it started to become more nebulous for me. It started to become more of a chore to read. And it was pretty disappointing because I had heard great things about this book. I had heard great things about this author. This is a subject that I enjoy. I mean, I'm more of a modern historian. I would say I enjoy more of the last 400 to 500 years of history rather than the ancient history, especially the prehistory, the origin of our species and all that type of stuff. That has never really interested me because to me, it feels like a lot of guesswork. We do have artifacts and we do have anthropology for that reason. And there's fossils and all that jazz, but it does also feel like motivation and actual humanity is guesswork because we don't have anything written down. So I gravitate more towards the internal of history, the reason why people made choices that they did, or how people were affected by the choices of governments and nations. I like that type of stuff, getting in the weeds with those specific historical stories. So it becomes difficult for me to pay as much attention and to be as locked in with these ancient histories where it's like, well, we found the remnants of a building, and so we assume that this was a 4-person home or whatever. Those assumptions caused me to kind of check out a little bit. This is probably a personal failing, or it may just be that I don't enjoy this subject as much as I thought. But this specific book still had some solid information in it if you can get past the tone, which I could not. Finally, we have The Age of Capital by Eric Hobsbawm. This was the last of the nonfiction for the month. This is the second book in this series. It goes Age of Revolution, Age of Capital, Age of Empire, and then Age of Extremes. This is such an interesting piece of history. And I found with the first book as well, I would not classify myself as a Marxist historian, but I do not carry the same aversion that some of my professors did to Marxist history. I'm interested in all metatextual looks at history. I like analytical history. I like, taking a point of view and examining a time period through that point of view. That is interesting to me. So to examine, what is this, 1848, I believe, till 1875, which Hobsbawm calls the Age of Capital, which was a boom in not just the economy in England, but a boom in the global economy because of the fruits of capitalism's labor. So it was incredibly interesting to read a Marxist perspective. Hobsbawm is one of the most prominent Marxist historians. To read a Marxist perspective on a time period in which capitalism was clearly enhancing the lives of others. What I found fascinating was he wasn't trying to always argue his point. He was offering solid perspectives, and I think fact-based history throughout this time period, discussing the development of industry, immigration, just the development of the modern world through the Industrial Revolution, all of that stuff, and was offering solid facts and figures. It is such a well-researched history, and although he does offer his perspective, his overarching Marxist perspective throughout the book, it never felt like he was trying to undermine this time period, which I very much enjoyed. I do find when reading any type of history that has more of an overarching thrust of history, like this is the reason things were happening, which is very clear with Marxist history. As you can see, Marx's ideals and the understanding of the rise of the proletariat and all of the cycles of capitalism to communism that are laid forth in Marx's work. When you then apply all of those ideas to history and kind of slot in events in history to, oh, well, this is this and this equals this, and we're on the trajectory towards what Marx viewed as, the perfect communist utopia, it becomes difficult for me to actually buy into that theory, because there are just so many factors that drive history forward. This is my same problem with the great man of history theory, that a few men throughout history have made such an impact and shaped history. It's not that these theories and philosophies are wrong. It's that there is so much more. The wind could have been blowing differently on a specific day when the Titanic was, and the butterfly effect could have come into, there's just so much. Our world is chaos. There's so much that could go wrong or could go right that shape history. So it's hard to put on this, this clean, philosophical idea of why history progresses and why history progresses in the way that it does. Nevertheless, this is an incredibly interesting and well-written perspective. And if you're interested in more of an economic history of, it starts in 1740, I think, with the first book, and it goes all the way up to more modern times with the Age of Extremes. It's dense. It's not easy reading. It's not light reading. There's definitely, you got to put your thinking cap on, but I do think it's some of the best written history, and it could be a great place for you to start if you're if you feel behind on economic history and the economic forces that drove history forward. Okay, moving on. We have, in the fiction side of things, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I enjoyed this. I think that this is best read after having seen the movie, because Quentin Tarantino, obviously, the film is by the same name, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Best read afterwards because it unlocks more interiority of the characters in the film. And I found that to be a very interesting addition to the film itself. So the next time that I view the film after having read this book, I will be given another perspective. I find that to be interesting. Novelizations of film can be pretty useless at times. I read the novelization of A New Hope, and it was literally just word for word the movie. That really seems like a waste of time to me. So I was a little bit worried when I picked this up. It was on Kindle Unlimited, so I thought I would give it a try. But there is definitely more to the story here. Sure, it goes through, beat by beat, a lot of the stuff that we see in the film. But like I said, we spend more time with each character. We spend more time with their interior life. So we get to know more of their perspective and POV on specific events throughout the film. And I found that to be enough of a justification to read this. So who should read this? I will say, if you are not a fan of Tarantino's films, you will not be a fan of his writing, because the coarse language, the flip nature of his dialogue is present throughout, obviously. So if that's kind of a turnoff, if you're not a huge fan, the ultraviolence in a book is a little bit different than being, looking at it for me. So that wasn't a huge deal. But, if you like his films, you will like this book. And I think that you will be offered another perspective on one of his best. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood stands above, definitely top 3, maybe top 5 for me personally in his film canon. So if you are like me and you enjoy this person's work, give this one a shot. Then we have a spy novel that I enjoyed quite a bit. 3 out of 5, A Shadow Intelligence. This is pretty interesting. I am a fan of spy novels, but I am a fan of more of the Cold War era spy novels, because I have found that the modern technology, the cell phone, the laptop, has kind of removed a lot of the espionage from, media. It has blunted the effect of some of the interesting gadgets and techniques used, through the 60s, 70s, 80s in fictional media, obviously. I found that it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel as tactile. It doesn't feel as present. But I will say, this was one of the first more modern spy novels that I read that utilized modern technology in a way that didn't make it feel cheap, that didn't make it feel too easy for our protagonist, but it was woven through the story in a way that was very, very effective. It was not that modern technology was shied away from. In fact, it is very, very present in this story. There's mentions of deep fakes. Cell phones are all over the place, laptops, hacking, the whole nine. Everything that the modern spycraft leans on, ransomware attacks, DDoS attacks, all that type of stuff. But it was woven throughout the story with such care, and you could tell that the author knew what they were talking about enough that a layperson like me could just get lost in the story. The story itself, your basic kind of spy novel, your basic spy having to come in from the cold, maybe being betrayed by their home country in a foreign land, having to live off the land, live off the grid, deal with their own problems and failings. It's an interesting down the road spy novel, but there's a lot to like in here. It's not perfect by any means, but I did enjoy my time quite a bit. So Shadow Intelligence, if you are a fan of Le Carré, any of the old spy novels, you know, Eye of the Needle is one that comes to mind that I read earlier. I wouldn't really classify that as a spy novel. I mean, maybe. He's more of an assassin. But any of those old style paperbacks that you could just sink your teeth into, I think that this is a modern version, a modern type of retelling where we're kind of getting a little bit more zhuzh in the in the series itself. So give this one a shot and let me know what you think. Next up, we read The Strength of the Few, the new release by James Islington, the second in the Hierarchy trilogy. I did a full review of this. Safe to say that I thought it was a little bit of a step down. Still enjoyed it well enough to be excited for the third book. If you would like my full thoughts, you can click on this video right here. Let's move on. Next up, we have one of my favorite pieces of political satire, my favorite piece of divisive political writing, Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov. I want to do a full video on this because I think that there is an opportunity to read this book incorrectly. Now, I don't say that because I, think that it's possible to read books incorrectly. At a certain point, if you are reading and you are gaining something from the text, you're reading for reading's sake. That's fine. But I do think that you miss a lot of the political satire here. You miss a lot of the power of this book if you do not understand the historical context of post-revolution Russia. This is written in probably 1923, published in 25. So we've got about 5 years of the revolution going on. So enough dissent has settled on the community and the society that was post-revolution Russia to start to write these types of books, to start to see the cracks in the monolith that was the new Bolshevik regime. So I would say subscribe to the channel, please, to look out for the Heart of a Dog context breakdown. Not quite sure what I'm going to call it, but I do want to go a little bit more in depth with this because I think there is such richness of writing and allegory and satire throughout this book. And I hope that, it's a small book. So I hope that I can write a video and record a video that is solid enough, that does this book justice, that will then allow you to enter into this book in a way that you can understand almost everything that's going on under the text, the subtext of this novel, which I think is where this novel really shines. Finally, we finish up with Emma, another Jane Austen. I am going through pretty much all of the Jane Austen books. I only have Mansfield Park left, I think. Not 100% sure. Yeah, I only have that one left. I had read this a long time ago, obviously, like I did with most Jane Austen. It's so funny to look back on my prior ratings of these books because they're all like 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, because I was such a snot-nosed teenager that I didn't understand. So giving myself maybe 10 to 12 years of growth, of being exposed to other pieces of media, of just learning and understanding how to read these books, and then going back to them and realizing that these are some of the best books ever written in the English language. Having this read to me, so listening to the audiobook version of this, really made the comedy crackle. There's a pattern and a cadence to a lot of Austen's writing, and there's a lot of sarcasm, and the way that this audiobook was directed, the readers of this audiobook, I think they really understood the way to deliver these lines. And that can be such a fascinating way to absorb a book. I like to read these books first, these classics specifically. I like to, partake in the text first, and then if I enjoy it enough to have it read to me by a competent audiobook narrator, which can be tough sometimes, but I think Austen is such a powerhouse in the field of literature, obviously, that there are thousands of audio interpretations. And then after the audio interpretation, watching a film interpretation. So the film I believe Anya Taylor-Joy is in this. It came out during COVID. But then there's also, Clueless is kind of a modern adaptation of Emma in a little bit. If you squint, you can see it. So I just find the permutations of Austen's work to be such a fruitful and engaging way to not just focus on the text itself, but to understand how different humans have taken this core source text and applied it to different moments in history, different moments in their own personal lives to tell their own personal stories. This is the power of Jane Austen, not just the fact that her books are some of the best written, some of the most economy of language, some of the funniest pieces of English literature, but also that they are such universal stories that storytellers and filmmakers throughout time have been able to modify and adapt and create their own stories off of the base of these books is just something that I really enjoy, and I love, kind of absorbing every take that people have on these books. So this was a pretty great month of reading. I'm excited to read more in December. If you would like to keep up with all that we're doing, we've got a great month of December for you, going over best of 2025, worst of 2025. I am ranking all of the books that I read. That's 165 books. We may just cap it at 150 because that was the original goal. So you're going to want to subscribe so that you can be able to check all of those videos out. Thank you so much for watching this video and spending some time with me. I hope you're reading something very, very good. I will see you in the next video.